Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Last time we were discussing major poets and paused after concluding the work of Vallabhadeva. Now we shall resume the discussion with royal poets in this third part. In addition to major poets we have discussed in previous part, now we shall discuss about the royal poets from Kashmir. They are called royal poets because they were patronized by various kings in different time of span. Poetry was not a profession as such, it was a hobby of high learning. Still, some have constructed excellent Sanskrit literature. Kallana and other writers have referred to a fairly large number of royal poets. Many good poetic works ascribed to them are quoted in anthologies. Gopaditya. Gopaditya's time is 5th century BC. Gopaditya is perhaps the earliest royal poet that is referred to. He belonged to an illustrious race of kings who successively ruled Kashmir. Kallana gives a brief account of his ancestry tracing to Kasiti Nanda. Devya kulataro kanda shitinandosh sheshitaha tatastasya suvasti shabda smaran vashan mahim dvapanchashat mandanam klam dvau maso cha tadatmajaha apasiddha sunandakya prakhyata smarashastrakrit narah shashtim tasyat sanu stavatoksharavya tatsutaha varshan bhudvi bhurgrama yokshabala makara et jugopagopadityoya kshmam swadvipam tadatmajaha varnashrama pratyaveksha darshita diviggodayaha sakholatva gikahadi gramaskanda purabhidan shamanga samukhascha graharanya pratyapadayat jeshtheshwaram pratisthapya gopadra varyadeshajaha gopa praharan krutina ena swakarita dvijaha pavanan grahareshu brahmanansa nyaropayat. Gopaditya seems to have ruled in Kashmir for a long time and earned the affection of people by constructing many temples and donating many agraha to deserving Brahmins. He ruled for the span of 60 years. He is supposed to have lived during the period of 5th century BC. There is no poetical work written by him as per the account given by Kallana. It appears that he had illustrated some of the rules enunciated by Vasunanda in his work on erotics, to which there is a reference by Kallana. Gonand is the second poet, royal poet, who lived between a period 240 to 200 BC, and one of 3 early kings who according to Kallana ruled in Kashmir somewhere prior to 200 BC. As in the case of Gopaditya, no work of his available, but there is a humorous verse ascribed to him in one of the anthologies. Matrugupta is another royal poet whose period is 100 to 50 BC. He is Kashmirian by domicile and not by birth. He seems to have ruled in Kashmir for a period of 4 years and 9 months, but no information about his parentage is available as on date. A fairly long account of the poet is given by Kallana. According to Matrugupta, seems to have come to the court of King Harsha Vikrmaditya of Ujjain and appears to have been serving him silently without even once trying to push himself up to win the royal favors as other poets were doing. According to Kallan, Matrugupta was made the Kashmir of Vikramaditya, about whom Kallana significantly remarks. He probably written a commentary on Natya Shastra of Bharata Muni. This is to be seen from a reference in the Natya Pradipa of Sundara Mishra. While defining Nandi, Abhinavgupta also quotes him. He might have written Natya Shastra. It is inferred from numerous references to Matrugupta by Raghava Bhatta in his commentary on the Abhijnana Shakuntala of Kalidas. There are about 14 references about his work on dramaturgy. However, keeping in view the availability of time at our disposal, I would like to quote only one of them, which encompasses the overall aspects of types as enunciated in Dasharupakam by Dhananjaya, which is based on Natya Shastra of Bharata Muni. Tallakshanam Nataka Kshanamuktam Matruguptacharyahi Prakhyat Vastu Vishayam Dhirodattadanayakam Rajarpi Vanshacharitam Tatha Divyashray Anvitam Yuktam Vruddhi Vilasadyair Gunairananaya Ibhutivi Shrungaravira Anyatara Pradhana Rasasanstrayam Prakrutyava Abhyasandhyana Gasandhyattaran Vibhushanaihi Patakasya Naikera Vrittam Patnagaischa Pravrittivi Natyalankara Nairnanama Bhasha Yukpatra Sanchayehi Anka Praveshayake Aradhyam Rasabhavam Ujvalam Sukhadukhota Pattikrutam Charitam Yaccha Bhubhrutamatam Atracha Bharatah Ashirvachana Sanyukta Apyalankrita Asya Vyakhyaane Matruguptacharyehi Shodha Shangri Padanvita Ityuddavruta. Abhinavgupta also quotes him frequently. Ythoktam Bhatta Matruguptena Pushpancha Danya Itteko Bhuyonusparshananvitaha. Matrugupta may not merely be an author of a work on dramaturgy or a commentator of the Natya Shastra of Bharata, as he often supposed to be. He is referred to as a great poet by Kuntala, but both of them wrote similar treatises. Dharmsoka is the next in the line of royal poets, whose period is 50 to 100 of current era. He belonged to comparatively early times. He is different from Ashika Maurya. He was the third ascent from Kanishka of the first Gonand dynasty of Kashmir. Since it is known that Kanishka lived in the latter half of the 2nd century of current era, the date of Dharmsoka may approximately be placed in the second half of the 1st century of current era. Kallana refers to Dharmsoka in glorious terms as a great builder of cities and progressive monarch of Kashmir. As per Kallana, Dharmakosa salvaged himself from the scenes by embracing Buddhism and built the city of Srinagari. He appears to be a poet and a man of letters also, but no work of him as such is available. There is, however, a verse occurring in one of the anthologies which ascribed to him and is extremely nice. Ahama hamika badotsaham rato sasanshanisini prasarati mrudu prodastrinam kathamruta durdine kalita pulaka sadya stokauda bhatasta koraka valeti shaner bala nakshasthale taram drishyam. Next is Muktpida, whose period is 699 to 735 of the current era. It preceded a kingless Kashmir after Anaditya, who was not a poet. Only after the end of 7th century of the current era again, royal kings usurped the throne. Muktpida Lalitaditya was the third of Durlabhavardhan of the Karakota dynasty of Kashmir. His elder brothers were Chandrapida and Tarapida. One of his ministers was Shakti Swami. His date seems to be almost definite, as it is stated that he ruled Kashmir from 699 to 735 CE. Kallana described him as a great king who introduced new systems in his administration. Raja Sri Lalitaditya Sarvhomastato Bhavat Pradarshakeshwarastra Stru Vidhera Buddhir Gocharaha. Jaypida was a great patron of learning whose period is 779 to 813 of the current era. His court was adorned by great poets like Udbhata, Kshiraswamy, Manoratha and others. It was during the reign of a royal poet, the Royal Council of Poets was founded for the first time in Kashmir, and Udbhata was made the president on a fabulous honorarium of 1 lakh dinars gold coin in currency at that time per day. The date of Jaypida is generally accepted on the basis of the account given by Kallana that he ruled over Kashmir from 751 to 782 of current era. Kallana held him on high esteem as a great poet of nature and refers to him as to his capacity in describing natural phenomena. It is unfortunate that not a single work of him is available today except stray references. Avantivarman is the next poet, royal poet, whose period is 855 to 885 of the current era. Avantivarman was also a royal poet of Kashmir. He was the first king of Utpala dynasty. Like Jaypida, he too was an enlightened monarch and a patron of learning. His royal court was also adorned by great poets like Muktakan, Shivaswami, Anandavardhan and Ratnakar. He ruled over Kashmir from 855 to 884 CE. Avantivarman probably developed interest in poetry due to his association with great poets who had adorned his court. Kallana compared him with great king Mandhata and stated that by his good conduct and righteous administration, Avantivarman delighted the hearts of good men in his kingdom. Avantivarma samrajyam prapya patita kantaka chakara charitaish chitram santam kantakitam vapuhu idrushair dharma vrittantaye pravartita krutodayaha avantidevaha pati smamandhante vasundaram. Kanaka is the next royal poet whose period is 950 to 1300 CE. He was an eminent poet of Kashmir. He is popularly known as Kanaka or Kanaka Varsha. He may be identical with King Kshemendra, surnamed Kankana Varsha, who ruled Kashmir from 958 to 968 of the current era according to Kallana. Kshemagupta bidano budat raja tadatmaja asava sevanotsikta vitta tarunya sanjvara tasya kankana varshosita abhidhanam vidhayate toshi tachya sakrucha krurdorshno hi kankana varshitam. So his date may be fixed in the second half of the 10th century of current era. Sara Samuchya, a commentary on Kavya Prakash, also ascribed to him a verse which is beautiful. Kalasha is the next royal poet in the series whose period is 1050 to 1100 of the current era. From Kashmir, perhaps King Kalasha. His father was Anantaraja. He ruled Kashmir between 1080 to 1088 of the current era. Kallan refers him as a monarch equal only to King Bhoja of spotless fame. Patnya samprerita shashvata nayasneha mudaya putraya kalashaya bhudrajyam datum samudyattaha sacha bhoja narendrascha danota karshena vishrutau suritasmin kshane tulyam dvavastam kavibandhavo. Billionaire describes him as a man of letters who was both wealthy and learned. Though no work of Kalasha, either in prose or poetry, exists as such for the present. There are clear indications in various literary works in Sanskrit to show that he was a poet. Kshemendra quotes a verse ascribed to him as an example of merit while defining the meter called Rathadatta. Apart from these principal Kashmiri and royal poets, there are also names of other kings whose verses are often quoted in the anthologies. While the names of poets are mentioned in some cases, the names of the works from which they are taken are not stated. It is also difficult to say whether any of these poets are Kashmirian kings or not. Against the background of this royal participation in Kashmir's literary activity, it is not difficult to understand the significance of Billan's observation. Kavyam ebhyah prakriti subhagam nirgatam kumkumancha chayotkarshad bhavati jagatam vallabhat durlabhancha yasmin nantah sthitavati jagat sarabhute prayata Kashmo Raste Niyat Muragadi Sharaksha Spandatvam. Now, herewith, after concluding the discussion on Kalasha, let us turn towards minor poets from Kashmir. The major poets and the royal poets of Kashmir, who by their beautiful compositions enrich Sanskrit literature and enhance the glory of Kashmir, have been discussed here before in part first and part second. There are many more Sanskrit poets from Kashmir, but unfortunately their names or works are not known. They might be major or royal poets, but cannot be said definitely. For of now, some of them are discussed now in part 3 as minor poets. Muktpida is the first minor poet whose period is 850 to 900 of current era. He is associated with Anandavardhana, Ratnakara, Shivaswami, as could be seen from a reference in Kallana. Muktpida might have been as great as any one of the 3 other poets with whom he has been associated. Unfortunately, no definite as it is the same as that of his colleagues, namely the second half of the 9th century of current era. It has already been stated that all these poets adorned royal courts of Anandavardhana, the king who ruled Kashmir about the same time. Few verses ascribed to Muktpida are quoted by rhetoricians in their works to illustrate either a sentiment of a figure of speech. Chakrapala is the next in minor poets series, whose period is 850 to 900 of the current era. He is referred to as Chakra only by the editor of the Auchitya Vicharacharika because he is the brother of Muktpida. His date also may be placed in the second half of the 9th century of the current era. Apart from the date, no other details either regarding his work or his parentage are available. One of the verses ascribed to him and quoted by Kshamendra is very nice, as it pertains to the capacity of a king who perhaps was his patron. Bhallata is the next in the series of minor poets lived between 875 to 925 CE. In the court of Shankaravarman, Bhallata was a poet during the period 884 to 902 of the current era, immediately after Anandavardhan. Personal information about him is also not available. He is different from Bhattamalla, the author of Dhatu Path, who is referred to by Mallinath in his Sarvankasha commentary on the Shishupalavad of Madha. He is also different from a poet of the same name in Andhra, who is referred to by Nanya in his Shapta Chintamani. He is the author of the work titled as Bhallata Shataka, which is hard but is pleasing poem on the morals. Great scholars like Abhinavgupta, Kshamendra and Mambata have quoted some of his verses in their works, which indicates the merit and popularity of his poems. Many verses of this occur in the anthologies. Dr. Keith has quoted few verses by way of appreciation in his book History of Sanskrit Literature. This is an indication of his having composed 3 works in the colophon of his poem Iti Ratnatre Mallata Shatakam Samaptam. Kaiyat, whose period is 950 to 1000 CE, was the son of Chandraditya and grandson of Vallabhadev. He has written a commentary on the Devi Shataka of Anandavardhana in the year 977 of the current era, when King Bhimagupta was the ruler of Kashmir. So his date has been fixed in the second half of the 10th century CE. In the opinion of some scholars, he is supposed to be author of Chitrakavya, written under the name Devi Shataka, which they say exists in Kashmir but could not be traced. Vallata is the next minor poet whose period is 950 to 1000 of the current century. There are 2 poets of the same name. One is Bhatta and the other is Bhagavata. The former is quoted by Kshamendra while giving an example of the beautiful meter, but the name of the work from which it is taken is not mentioned by him. Since Kshamendra has quoted him, Vallata must be prior to Kshamendra. Kallana is the next well-known poet in the minor poets series, whose period is 1000 to 1150 CE. He is well-known Kashmirian historian. He is principally a chronicler who documents history. He is considered as a minor poet because he has composed only two poetical works. One of them is a shorter prayer poem called Stuti Stotram, called Ardhanari Nateshwar Stotra, and the other is a kavya by name Jayasingha Budhaya. The first one is written in praise of Lord Shiva and Parvati. It is edited in the Kavyamala. There are altogether 18 verses in it, which are composed in the beautiful Shardula Vikrmaditya meter. Shakyo vara itum jayena hutabuk chatrena suryatapo nagendro nishitankushena samado dandena godardabho vyadir bheshja sangrahaischa vidhair mantra prayogair visham sarvasyaushadam asti shastra vihitam murkhasya nastyaushadam. The first verse of this poem is repeated as the second verse in the first book of Rajatarangini. The verses are full of highest philosophical truths and reveal the spiritual wisdom of the author. The last verse of the poem is a fine specimen of this type. Premarda vapusho vilokya miritam devya samam swamino maulo yasya nisha patira navasuta veni nisha mishritaha aste swamya anuvartanarthamiva tatkurtva vapukhanditam deya dvayamavanamsa bhagavan devordhanarishvara. The other poetical verse of Kallana is probably a eulogy of his patron king Jaysimha, who ruled there in the first of the 12th century CE. It is therefore possible to say that Kallana was a contemporary of King Jaysimha. The poetical work is not available at present. A verse from it is, however, preserved in the Sara Samuchaya of Ratnakanta. Alankara is the next poet whose time is 1000 to 1150 CE. He was a minister in the court of King Jaysimha of Kashmir, according to statement of Kallana. He was a Brahmin by birth and son of Vishwavari. He was the elder brother of the famous poet Manaka, as stated by Kallana himself. He was also known as Lankha, which is perhaps an abbreviation of Alankara. Since the period of King Jaysimha is available somewhere in the second quarter of 12th century, that of Alankara may be fixed in the first of the same century. This Alankara called an assembly of 30 famous contemporary poets and men of repute to examine the potential poetical work of his brother Manaka. A list of these poets was given by Manaka in his poetical work. There is frequent reference to Alankara by Manaka in his Kavya. In one of the verses, there seems to be a reference to a work written by Alankara, but the name of the work is not furnished anywhere in his work by Manaka. It is therefore not possible to say anything about the nature of contents of the work of Alankara. It may, however, be stated that the work of Alankara may be a prose work in Sanskritam as it is compared to the work of Bana, the well-known prose writer. Jinduka is the next, whose period is 1100 to 1150 CE. Jinduka was a contemporary Kashmiri poet of Kallana as per Manaka. His period can be fixed as first half of the 12th century. No information is available either about his parentage or about the nature of the work that he wrote, but his name at different places is mentioned as a poet. Lostadeva is the next, whose period is 1125 to 1175 CE. He was a Kashmiri by birth. He is also known as Lostaka. He was the son of Ramyadeva and lived during the second and third quarters of the 12th century. The poet Manaka has praised both the father and the son and given fairly long account of their achievements. Thus, it is clear that Lostadeva belonged to an illustrious family of learned men and was the author of several books. Lostadeva mentions the name of his father in one of the last few verses of his prayer poem Stuti Stotra and also refers to his family prestige. He is well known as a good commentator on some of the Mahakavyas in Sanskrit. He seems to have spent his last days in Banaras and ultimately taken to asceticism, sannyas. Lostadeva appears to be the author of several works. Out of them, only two are now available. One of them is commentary on Raghuvamsha of Kalidasa, the other prayer poem called Dinakarananda Stuti, which is edited in the Kavyamala series. It is based on two manuscripts from Kashmir, one in Sanskrit and the other is in Sharada script. There are altogether 53 verses in it, in which are full of devotion to Lord Shiva. One of the verses is extremely beautiful as it describes the complete surrender of the devotee to the Lord. Ityam na kim vyabharutam na kimuktam attam kim na kalite lalitam na vapi sarvatra tatra sharanam krupanasvametvam yehi dehi charanam shirasindu maule. The prayer poem was composed by the poet in Banaras on the banks of the Ganga during his last days is clear from the last three verses of his poem. Yaska is the next in the series, whose period is 1225 to 1250 of the current era. Jona Raja is of the opinion that Yask lived in the court of King Sangaramapala, who ruled in Kashmir from 1235 and 1252 of the current era. So his period could be second quarter of 3rd century. He appears to have written a poetic composition in which the ruling king of Kashmir is made the hero. Unfortunately, nothing more is known either about the poet or his writing. Laulika is the next, whose period is 1275 to 1300 CE. He is more popularly known as Lolaka. He is a poet of Kashmir, quoted in Subhashita Vali. He is often referred to as Rajanka Laulika to show that he is a Kashmirian. No details are available regarding his parentage, etc. In Colophon, at the end of his commentary on his Shrikanta Charita of Manaka, Jona Raja mentions that he is the grandson of Laulika or Lolaka. It cannot be certainly said that whether he is the same as poet Laulika. Bhagavata Amrutadatta is the next, whose period is said to be 1325 to 1373 of the current era. Peterson says in his introduction to Subhashita Vali of Vallabhadeva that Bhagavata Amrutadatta was a poet in the court of King Shahabuddin, who ruled in Kashmir from 1352 CE. So the period of this poet can be determined as 2nd and 3rd quarter of the 14th century CE. The work of Amrutadatta is not available. Unfortunate. No information is also available regarding his personal history. Two verses, however, occur under his name in one of the anthologies. They express a challenge of the king who perhaps was his patron to an invader of Kashmir. Jagadhara lived during the period 1350 to 1400 CE. He is mainly grammarian. He has also written two poetical works. One of them is a prayer poem titled as Stuti Kusuma Manjiri, and the other is a guide to authors to avoid the misuse of words and is called Apashabda Nirakarana. In the first work, he gives details of his forefathers in the last chapter. According to it, he is the son of Ratnadhar and grandson of Gaurahar, who is stated to have been very learned both in Vedas and the Shastras. There are certain clues which helps us to determine the date of Jagadhara, because Sitikanta, the son of daughter's daughter of his grandson, who wrote a commentary on his grammatical work, is known to have lived during the time of Hasan Shah in Kashmir, that is at the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century of the current era. Therefore, the period of Jaypida can be fixed as second half of the 14th century working backwards. The Stuti Kusumanjali contains 38 prayers in as many as chapters excluding the last chapter, which is called Vamshavarnanam. In it, family history is given. The first chapter is devoted for Stuti Prastavana or introduction, and the last chapter is utilized for Punya Parinama Stotra, which is more or less in the nature of conclusion. The intervening chapters are named after the nature of particular type of prayer that is composed, such as Krupa Krandana Stotra or Karuna Krandana and so on. Those prayers are full of Advaita philosophy of Adi Shankaracharya and are composed in various chants, meters. There are 1409 verses, including the 16 verses that are also Vamshavarnanam. The poem or the compilation of prayer poems commences with the usual Mangalacharana invoking Lord Ganesha and Saraswati. Om Swasti Sri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Hrudaya Bhirabhalayar Nargalay Jivanayar Gharayenar Vairiyam Swaminaha Krasha Kramashama Kshamaye Kshanam Uroda Gumara Hatimana Saraswati. At the end of the work, he said that he was well versed in the art of composing good poetry and expresses his gratitude to goddesses of learning for enabling him to sing the glory of the Lord. Ranjaka Ratnakantha, who is also a Kashmirian, has written a commentary on Stuti Kusumanjali. It furnishes at the end some information regarding few Kashmirian poets. Tattvajnana Parayana Dhaumyayana Muniparvarasya Anando Jani Vamshe Sumanishi Murta Ivanandaha Lakshmya Linkita Deha Ha Savalaha Satchakra Vikhyataha Vibudharchita Charana Yugalas Stasmada Damodaro Jataha Sakala Vipaschid Varyaha Pradnyajita Bruvaha Amatyaha Avataro Janittasman Panditasya Avatar Iva सर्वज्ञः सविभूतिः सर्वाच्यः सर्वमंगलोपेतः तस्या जनि तनुजन्मा शंकर इति भूतले ख्यातः अस्ति सद्गुरुकृपारसपात्रं रत्नकण्ठ इति तस्य तनुजः भास्करः स्तुतिरहस्य मेतं येन रत्नशतकं निरमा अपि वस्वगन्यः अष्टभिर्वशेमिते एकसहस्रसप्तशत अष्टत्रिंशत् विक्रम भूपतेः वरंग महिपाले कृष्णाम शासति मेदिनीम बालानां सुखबोधाय हर्षाय विदुषां कृता जगद कवैः काव्ये तेने श्याम लघुपंजिका इति श्रीराजनक शंकर कठात्मज रत्नकंठ विरचितयां लघुपंजिकयां समेतं काश्मोरक महाकवि श्री जगदधर भट्टस्य वंशवर्णनम. The names of poets like Ananda, Damodara, Avatar and Shankara are mentioned there, as could be seen from the verses ascribed to these poets occur in the various anthologies in Sanskrit. A few manuscripts, some of those works have been discovered some time before. It has also been specifically stated by Ratnakantha that he wrote his commentary Laghupanjarika on the Stuti Kusumanjali in the year 1738 of the Vikram era, when Aurangzeb was the ruling monarch in India. That corresponds to the second half of the 17th century CE and help us to determine the dates of the poets at last. Pandit Sri Baka, his period is 1425 to 1475 of the current century. Sri Baka appears to have existed in the royal assembly of King Jainuddin, who ruled Kashmir from 1417 to 1467 CE. There is perhaps a reference to him by Sri Vara in his Chronicle of the Kings of Kashmir. The name of Baka has not been clearly mentioned there, as the passage appears to be rather corrupt in print. In fact, the latter portion of the first half of the verse is not quite intelligent. It may be that a poet by that name lived in the court of Muslim king. No other details are available about him. The name of work which he wrote is also not known. There are, however, a few verses ascribed to him in some of the anthologies. Ananda, whose period is 1525 to 1575 CE, his first name of Ratnakantha mentions in the genealogy furnished by him in his contemporary Stuti Kusumanjali, as already mentioned before. He is one of the ancestors of Ratnakantha, who says that he was true to his name, happiness embodied in the very first verse at the end of his commentary. Tattvajnana parayana dhaumyayana muniparvarasya anando janivamshe samanipi murta ivanandaha. It is also mentioned that Ananda belonged to the Dhaumyayana Gotra. Since the date of Ratnakantha is known to be the second half of the 17th century of the current era, as stated by him, the date of Ananda can be placed in the second and third quarters of the 16th century working backwards. A manuscript of work called Ananda Kavya exists along with commentary in Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute at Pune. It is written in Kashmiri Devanagari characters and has 49 folios in it. It is not also very old in appearance. This is only manuscript of this poet. It starts with Mangalacharana Sumitrat Majasuprito Niruddha Balaharshitaha Harira Drubhutaye Vostum Ramascha Kathaya Vritraha. It is also stated in the commentary that Kavya is chiefly ethical in character and is full of sentiments. It is also stated that there are altogether 60 verses in it. Atiramaniya Sulalita Pada Sadguna Alankara Ritya Anugata Savarasanusita Niti Prachura Shashti Shloka Nibadda Bala Suvidneya Kavya Yatyana Nama Kavi Subidhat Majate. The poem ends with a short verse in the Anushtup Chanda. Avatar, whose period is 1600 to 1650 of the current era. It can be seen that Avatara was his paternal grandfather, which comes from the verse at the end of the commentary Rajan Ka Ratnakantha on the Stuti Sumananjali. He must have been lived during first half of the 17th century. Most probably, it is this Avatara who is the author of Ishwara Shataka, which has been printed in the Kavyamala series. It is based on the manuscript which is available in Bhandarkar Institute. The poem affords delightful reading and deserves perusal. There are altogether 113 verses in it in various meters. They are full of beautiful Shabdalankar and Arthalankar. The poem starts with the invocation of Lord Shiva. The colophon at the end contains the name of the author. Iti Shri Mahakavyavatar Krutam Ishwara Shataka Satikam Samaptam Tatsav. Rajanka Kamalakara is the next poet whose period is 1600 to 1650 of current era. He is the next Kashmirian poet who has been assigned to the first half of the 17th century by the editor of Sahitya Darpan. The title Rajanka is very common amongst Kashmirian poets. It was given by the ruling monarchs of Kashmir to eminent personalities as to mark a personal distinction according to Kallana. He has been credited with the authorship of a commentary on the Kavya Prakash. Except this, no other information is available about him. Rajanka Gopala is the next, who is the author of several prayer poems, Stuti Stotra. His lineage is not known. There are 4 manuscripts, namely Dinakarananda Stavana, Pradyumna Shikhara Pithashtaka, Shivamala and Hanumana Stotram are now available. All these poems contain verses composed in praise of God in various forms. For instance, the first verse of the first work cited above is an invocation to Lord Shiva, and last verse indicates the name of the author. The last verse of the second poem cited above mentions the effect of offering the prayer. This is the verse of the third poem cited above, contains the name of the author and the purpose with which the prayer is composed. The name of the author is mentioned in the colophon of each one of the works. Yasakara is also the author of prayer poem. Details regarding his death and parentage are not available. Devi Stotram is the name of the prayers poem written by Yaskara. It consists of verses composed in praise of Divine Mother as stated in the opening verse. Ratnakarabhya antarato gruhitvalanಕಾರ sutrani yathakramen vando vadevya ghiraja putrya karomi shansan shruti gocharani. This prayer poem is also called as Alankarodharana Sannibadha Devi Stotram. A manuscript of this also available. The last verse of it contains the name of the poet and the reasons for composing it. Prabdyumnasya chakar yatra girija Sri Sharika anugraham tatha yatra varaha lochana bhuva shari sarit sangata raja sapravara bidho hara girim yato madoho yat strishtam yatra statra pure yashaskara kavi stuštava gauri miti. There are 4 more poets in the section, namely Rajanka, Vijayapala, Bhattamallata and Tallana and Argata. Excepting one verse each, no other information about their period, work or lineage is available, all is obscure. Conclusion. It may now be said that there are 21 major poets of Kashmir, 12 royal poets and 23 minor poets. There are some poets whose information regarding their period, lineage, their works is not available or traceable. Kashmirian poets had composed mostly in Vaidarbhi Riti. This may be the reason Billana states that only the fortunate can write in the Vaidarbhi style and that goddess Saraswati appeared seated as it were in the language of those poets, singing melodiously on the flute. I express my heartfelt gratitude to all listeners of this discourse. I really enjoyed this experience. I especially thankful to Dr. Narendra Joshi, with whom I first interacted a couple of years back while going through an online course on Indology. His pursuance inspired me to go through thoroughly as possible to the literary history of Kashmir, which therefore given me this golden opportunity to go through the proud era of almost 1000 years of Kashmir. Now, to conclude, I will like to recite the most pious and ever enchanting mantra from Shukla Yajurveda. Shukla Yajurveda Sapta Chatvarinshata Sanhitasya Panchavinshati Adhyaya Shanti Patham Pathet. Om Anah Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwato Dabdaso Aparita Sa Udbhidaha Devano Yatha Sadamidvrude Asanna Prayuvo Rakshitaro Dive Dive Devanam Bhadra Sumatiryayatam Devanagn Ratirabhino Nivartatam Devanagn Sakhyamupasedi Vayam Devan Ayoh Pratirantu Jivase Tan Purvaya Nimidahu Mahe Vayam Bhagam Mitramaditim Dakshamastridam Aryamanam Varunagn Somamashvina Saraswatina Subhagamayaskarata Tanno Vato Mayo Bhuvatu Bheshajantan Mata Pruthivi Tatpita Deoho Tadravana Somasuto Mayo Bhuvas Svashina Shrunutan Dishnayuvam Tamishanan Jagasastu Shaspatindhiyan Jenmabhavasehu Mahevayam Pukhano Yatha Veda Samasada Vrude Rakshita Payuradabdaha Swastaye Swastina Indro Vradachravaha Swastina Pukha Vishwavedaha स्वस्ति नस्तारक्षो अरिष्टनेमि स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्ददातु पृषदश्वामरुताः पृष्णमातरः शुभं यावानो विदधेषु जन्मयः अग्निजिह्वामनवः सूरचक्षसो विश्वे नो देवा अवसागमन्निः भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवा भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवाग्ंसस्तनभिर्षेमहि देवहितं यदायुः शतमेन्नु शरदो अन्तिदेवा यत्रा नश्चक्राजरसन्तनूनाम् पुत्रासो यत्र पितरो भवन्ति मानो मध्यारिरिषतायुर्गन्तोः अदितिर्द्यौरदितिरन्तरिक्षमदितिर्माता स पिता स पुत्रः विश्वे देवाः अदितिः पञ्चजना अदित्यर्यातमदित्यर्यानि त्वं द्योः शान्तिरन्तरिक्षं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवाः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि यतो यतः समिहसे ततो नो अभयं कुरु शन्नः कुरु प्रजाभ्यो भयं नः पशुभ्यः सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः सुशान्तिर्भवतु धन्यवादः पुनर्मिलामः।